All right, so it's that time of year again. It's time for stew. I gotta tell you, I have worked on this recipe for a while and it's a real crowd pleaser. I've taken recipes from several different chefs and this is what I've come up with. You have to have patience, take your time. It takes at least an afternoon, ideally 2 days, but you can follow the recipe and decide for yourself whether you want to do it over 2 days or 1 day. Originally, one of the recipes called for short ribs. Short ribs have become pretty expensive and sort of takes away from the idea of having a comfort stew. So I have switched it over to just simple stewing beef. A couple of things you have to keep in mind. One is the braising is all important. Take your time when you look at this video and you'll see that I'm braising the beef. Braise all of it, braise all the cubes. Make sure your reductions are done right. It's not complicated. When you look at the recipe, it's going to look like it is, but honestly, just go step by step. It is easy peasy with the cheapest cut of meat, and the results are absolutely fantastic, and as I say, it's an amazing crowd pleaser. So let's get started. What do you think? Okay, so the first step to making this amazing stew is you got to take a pot and dump in about 2.5 bottles of red. I don't use cheap cooking wine. I use something that's medium priced. You don't have to go overboard. Don't do crazy. But 2.5 bottles should do it. Reduce it by half on a low simmer. I use, as a little hack here, I use a spaghetti noodle to set the marker of the depth of where the wine is at this time, and as it cooks down I'll be able to measure it against another noodle against it. So as I say, I think that's where the expression using your noodle comes from, but don't quote me on that. Now the next step is to take your beef, stewing beef, and season it with salt and pepper. I've already started on this, as you can see. I don't need to bore you with all the gory details, but I'm doing this at the same time that the wine is on a simmer, low boil. Well, you don't want it to boil, you want a low simmer is what you want. And as I said before, that's going to reduce by half. And while that's going on, I've now seasoned this with salt and pepper. You can get the exact amounts on the website for how much, for the weights and measures. All right, let's get to the next step then. Brought out some flour, just all-purpose flour, and I've got my stewing beef, pardon me, which I am going to just coat in flour. I'm going to do this until all of it is done, and this will provide a great base for when we start braising. All of these are critical steps in making a great stew as opposed to just an average stew. A lot of people try to rush it by either not braising it enough or taking the time to do this method with the flour. Some people call it a dusting. I actually do it fairly liberally because this is going to enhance the stock, or the gravy as we call it, in the end. So anyway, I'll finish this up. As you can see, I've now finished dredging the stewing beef, and we move on to the next step. I'm going to set up the kitchen stove, and we'll be right back. I've got the pan heated now with canola oil, and I've got it set on a little better than 3/4 heat, and I'm now going to take the dredged beef pieces, and we're going to sear them and create a nice braise. Now this takes some time, but I'll tell you right now, if you want a really good gravy for the stew, it is totally worth it. And don't crowd the pan. In fact, that's about as much as I'm going to put in there right now. And I'm going to do all sides, not just 2 sides, not 4. I'm going to do all of them. And like I said, it's going to take some time to do this. And we're going to speed ahead, and I'll show you what it looks like when they're done. So here we are, a bazillion hours later. I've been sauteing these what seems like forever. Or browning them. Braising would be another term. These are really close. I've gotten most sides. I know it's easy to take shortcuts when it gets this long. Now you could cut your time in half by using 2 frying pans, obviously. But I didn't today because I've got a television in the kitchen and I was watching Days of Our Lives. Not really, actually I was watching CNN, which was depressing. But, had a cocktail. I've got most of these browned up nicely. Television, what more could you want? These are going to be spectacular. This will create such depth in this stew as you will not believe. I wish you had smell-o-vision. It's so smelly right now. Smelly in a good way. So I'm going to transfer the last of these into the rest of these. And we're going to go from there. Alright, next stage. We are going to throw in, you know what the nice things about making stew is? I've got a bunch of onions here that were leftovers. I don't even care how they're chopped, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to brown them for about 5 minutes. I'm going to lower the heat in a second. But first I'm going to add in some rough chopped celery. And I'm going to add in rough chopped carrots. And this is going to add, obviously, more flavor and more foundation to the sauce. More to the gravy. I should keep calling it sauce, but we all know it's gravy. So, there. And I'm not seasoning this. I normally would, but I've already seasoned the beef. And I can always add later, as you'll see as we go along. All right, so give me a couple minutes, and let's go from there. All right, so we're almost there now, and what I'm going to start with is the beef broth. In fact, what I'm going to do is puncture the other side of these boxes, and I'm putting in 3 liters of no salt beef broth. I always prefer to use no salt because I would rather control it myself. As we go, and in the meantime, I've reduced the wine by half. I'm going to show you exactly how I did that, or how I measured it more accurately. As you can see here, I'll hold it up close. I don't know if you can see that in this light here against my hand. It's probably better. But you can see the discoloration on the noodle, and you can see when I dip it into the pot, half of it's gone. And that's how I know approximately that the reduction is done properly. So now I add the warm wine reduction and the rest of the beef broth. And this is going to be rather full, as you can see, once we put the vegetables in. Alright, okay, so now goes the beef. And next goes the vegetables. And now I put in the tomato paste. This is basically, it's 1 can. But again, the amounts of the ingredients are in there. And I've got Italian seasoning. Normally I would use 2 bay leaves, but because these are so tiny, I'm using 3. And I've taken whole cloves, a whole head, and I've crushed them open. I haven't chopped them, but I've flattened a bit so that they can release their oil a lot easier. And I'm going to use some parsley, and that's just all rough because eventually this is all going to be cooked down, so I don't need to chop it. Same with the vegetables. I don't need to see that it's all evenly chopped. A lot of guys will say, oh, you know, you need to peel them and you need to do all this and all the rest of it. Well, guess what? I just wash them off, make sure that they're clean, and in it goes. Because at the end of the day, all of this stuff, aside from the beef, will be gone. All I want right now is for all the flavor to be imparted from that into the liquid. That is the main goal right now. And this is the last of the broth, and I'm going to be short in space, so I'm going to only put in about 2 and 80%, so 2.8 liters of the beef broth is going in. Other than that, now we're just going to put the top on it. I'm going to put the lid on it. I'm going to put it in the oven at 350 degrees, and we're going to simmer this or cook it for the next 3 hours. Actually, I'm going to do 300 degrees for 3 hours. That's easy. And every 30 minutes I'm going to pull it out and stir it up, and I'll show you what it looks like when it comes out. So I have had this in for 3 hours, and I changed my mind. I kept it at 350 the whole time, and I have, let's take a look at the meat. We can see, oh, look at that. See how that just peels apart right now? That's what the stewing meat should look like. That's perfect. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to leave this overnight. I'm going to let this cool down and chill, and tomorrow I will skim off the fat from the top, and we will continue. Okay, so we've had this cool overnight, and the next step is to skim off the fat. Now in this case the meat is pretty darn lean, so there isn't really a lot of fat, but there's a little bit. I just take a spoon like that, and you can see where the fat layers are. Now once this is done, I'm not going to take all of it because I like to have a little bit of fat with the stock. And as you can see, it's pretty darn lean. If you were doing this with short ribs, for example, there would be a whole ½ inch of fat on top. And short ribs are considerably more expensive. This is why I've switched now to just normal cube stewing steak. Alright, so I'm going to heat this up in the oven again. And once it gets warm, we'll come back and we're going to take all the beef out. I'll show you how that's done. The next step that we're going to do is remove the beef from the stock and place it in a separate pot, and I'm going to strain out all the rest of it, and then we're going to do a reduction. So let's start with the fun part. You know, whatever you do, don't strain yourself. Get it? Strain yourself. Anyway, this can be a messy process, but I keep the posts or the pots all really close. And I'm not going to bore you with all the gory details, but this is essentially the system. Take as much as you can out. And once you've taken out all the beef, then you just strain out all the other leftover particulates, and we go to the next stage. Isn't this fun? At this point I've taken out all the beef, and I'm going to put that in the oven to keep warm. And when I say warm, I'm talking like 140 degrees covered And I've also taken out all the particulates. All the leftovers are sitting in here. That's going to go in the what do you call it, waste. And I'm left with this beautiful piece of gravy. I'm going to now heat this and reduce this down to about half of what you're seeing here right now. And then when that's done, we'll get to the final stage. Now comes the moment of truth, so to speak. We are now going to assemble everything together. While this was reducing, I've reduced this gravy by half. And in the meantime, I kept the beef, the braised beef, I kept that in the oven warm. And at the same time that I did that, I sauteed, or I blanched some carrots. And I peeled some pearl onions. There you go. And I also blanched them. And I sauteed some mushrooms to get rid of the moisture. That's going in now. And we have finally a stew. And it's glorious. So what we're going to do now, believe it or not, is I'm going to let this go. I'm going to put this back in the oven at about 250 degrees. I should mention earlier that when I kept the beef in the oven, I've said 140, and that's wrong. It should be 145 or more. That's the threshold it should for food safe, just so you know. And now I'm just going to let all of this, all these wonderful flavors are going to amalgamate, and we'll wait and see what it looks like after about an hour in the oven. It's super rich, as you can see. Too bad again we don't have smell-o-vision. And we'll be right back. So after 2 days, here's what we've got. I've got some garlic mashed potatoes, and let's put that in. And there you go. A lot of work, but you know what? It's totally worth it. I think it's an amazing dish. As long as you got the time, you put the effort and the love into it, it's awesome.